Sometimes the world feels cold and gray. Shadows try to steal your light away. But a spark inside you will remain. A quiet fire that whispers your name. Don't you dare give up the fight. Hold on to your dreams so tight. This is your moment, rise and shine. Let your spirit break the line. With every step of strength you'll find. Leave the doubt and fear behind. Every mountain you will climb. Leaving echoes through all time. This is your moment, rise and shine. Let your spirit break the line. With every step of strength you'll find. Leave the doubt and fear behind. You are stronger than you know. Now go and let your colors show. Go, let them show.
Mr. Joseph Bannister. Joe, welcome to being with me at the program, my friend. It's great to see you.
Thanks, Paymon. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on your show, to see you in person, as we've done many times over the years.
By the way, Joe Bannister's website is agentfortruth.com. Agentfortruth.com, because that's the kind of man Joe Banister has been. So if you want to know the truth, he's the agent that will get you to it. So without any further delay, let's start, Joe, if you could tell our audience about your background, how your family situation, and, give us a rundown of how you, after, high school, what did you do, maybe about your family a little bit, and get to eventually become, looking to get a job at the IRS.
Thank you. Well, Joseph Bannister is my real name. I was born and raised in San Jose, California, middle class Roman Catholic family. Baptized, born and raised a Catholic, still a Catholic today, almost my 63rd birthday. And anyway, grew up, I went to Catholic schools, Catholic elementary school, Catholic high school, and then on to junior college in San Jose City College, and then from there to San Jose State University. I have 3 younger brothers. My mom and dad were married until death did they part. My father passed away just a few months before I was sworn in the to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division back in 1993. So, pretty typical middle class upbringing. I went to San Jose State. Took me about 5 years. A 5-year plan to get through college. And when I graduated from college, I went ahead and pursued a CPA certificate. By the way, I was an accounting major at San Jose State. And so typically it's not unusual for someone with an accounting degree to try to pursue becoming a certified public accountant, so a CPA. So I did that. I graduated in 1986 from San Jose State. And from about, 86 through 91, I worked in the accounting field. Started out at a very small firm founded by 2 partners who used to be managers at a firm called Pete Marwick, which for many years now has been known as KPMG. And so worked there for about 3 years. It's an international accounting firm. And received my CPA certificate, I think around 1991 timeframe. So during these 4 or 5 years after graduating, it took me that long to realize that, maybe accounting wasn't going to be a very exciting career, and I needed to spice up my career a bit more. So I decided to pursue a career in law enforcement, and went ahead and, did that. I investigated which agencies were basically looking for people with an accounting, finance, tax background. And I settled on the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and also the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. And another reason, besides the accounting field being a bit boring, was that I had lots of relatives and friends who were either in government service or law enforcement government service. In fact, the next brother, Bannister brother down from me, became a California Highway Patrol officer. And, at this point, he's actually retired. He retired as a lieutenant in the CHP, California Highway Patrol. The next brother down worked in the Daly City Fire Department as a firefighter originally, and he's risen to battalion chief in the Daly City Fire Department. Still there, actually hasn't retired yet. And then the baby brother, the fourth one down, Jeff, he just retired from the San Jose Police Department after a 25, 30-year career as a police officer with the city of San Jose. So I got to take a break from talking, but I mean, that basically brings us up through, college and choosing to an avenue of law enforcement, and particularly federal law enforcement.
So having that background in accounting that you had in formal education and also working in the field, what got you to look outside of that into becoming a special agent with the IRS's Criminal Investigation Division?
Well, the two brothers that I mentioned that were police officers for a career, that was uniformed police, right? The San Jose Police Department or the California Highway Patrol, and had a lot of other friends, a cousin who was in the Sacramento Police Department, friends that I grew up with that were in the San Jose Police Department. So basically, I knew that there was a uniformed law enforcement route. But I figured that with my background in accounting, that more of a criminal investigator role would be more appropriate. And in fact, there was also a friend of the family who had spent a career as an IRS special agent. And just for your listeners and viewers, as far as differentiating, the reason that they call a special agent special is because they have special duties that aren't shared by other agents, say, within the IRS. So the special means that you have powers of arrest, powers to execute search warrants, powers to carry a firearm, things like that. So where in the IRS you might have someone called a revenue agent or a revenue officer, my title in the IRS was special agent. And in fact, all the federal agencies, or a great majority of them, have a special agent position. So when you see an FBI agent interviewed, a current one or a retired one, they're almost invariably going to be an FBI special agent. The ICE agents that you see out there doing investigations, Immigration Customs Enforcement, they are special agents. So pretty much Secret Service, the agents that protect the president and others, they are special agents. So there's a grade 1811 series, which makes you designated as the special agent with these powers of arrest, powers to execute search warrants, powers to criminally investigate people. So being that there was this family friend who actually spent his career as an IRS special agent, and then that person who ended up becoming my boss years later, Bob Guarini, he also worked closely with other special agents in other bureaus like the FBI or the DEA. So through Bob, who was an IRS special agent, I was introduced to some of these other agencies, such as FBI, DEA, Secret Service. The precursor to ICE was known as the INS, for Immigration and Naturalization Service. They had special agents also. The Customs Service did. So anyway, there's lots of choices, but I found that my first choice was the FBI. And again, this is back in the 1990s when, Waco and Ruby Ridge and things like that were happening. But for many decades prior to that, the FBI had a pretty stellar reputation. Mm-hmm. And, so FBI is my first choice, but I also applied to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, primarily because this gentleman, Bob Guarini, kind of sold me on, well, hey, you know a lot about income tax. Mm-hmm. You're a CPA. Mm-hmm. I think the IRS would be a good fit. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, well, gosh, I don't know if I want to work for the IRS, but it turned out that the FBI had a hiring freeze. And even though I was fully qualified to be sent to Quantico to begin training and was basically waiting for that opportunity, the IRS had a hiring authority. They were not affected by the hiring freeze. And the IRS offered me a position in August of 1993. So I went ahead and said yes, accepted that position, and by November of 1993, I was sworn in the San Francisco office of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division to be a special agent.
Well, and during that special agent career that you had, could you tell us a little bit about the training you got, and how long you were for, any special things you ever come across, people who don't file income tax? Tell us a bit more about that, your tenure as a special agent, Joe.
Well, of course, prior to going into the IRS, as I said, I did earn a CPA certificate, and I worked in public accounting, as they call it, the KPMG international firm, and also a couple smaller accounting firms. I was a controller in a venture capital firm in Menlo Park, California. So I had quite a bit of experience on the outside, so to speak, outside of government. And typically, most IRS agents, at least back then, probably still today, would graduate from college or high school, and they would go directly into the IRS and then come out into the private sector, if at all. Whereas me, I was in the private sector to begin with and then went into the IRS. So a little bit of a culture shock that I wasn't prepared for when I went in to work for the IRS. Anyway, typically, I imagine my experiences are pretty typical. Your first day on the job as an IRS special agent, of course, you're eventually going to carry a gun, have a badge, do criminal investigations. But your first day on the job, when you've had no criminal investigator training, you don't have a firearm because you haven't been trained with one yet. And so you basically just they kind of keep you under close watch so you don't do anything stupid. And you have what's called a coach, a person, a seasoned, experienced special agent who will kind of show you the ropes, perhaps take you out on some investigative trips, to interview a witness and try to give you some experience. But I remember in my case, I was there a day or two, and I think I even wanted to just leave the office while, during a work day. And they said, no, you can't leave the office or talk with anyone because you have to go get sworn in. In other words, I had to go get sworn in to support and defend the Constitution. I had to take my constitutional oath before I could really do anything relating to my job. So I thought that was, quite interesting. So I was hired in the San Francisco office, and for those that know or don't know the San Francisco Bay Area, you have to go across the Bay Bridge to Oakland, where there's another federal building. And that's where I was sworn in, sworn oath to support and defend the Constitution. And then about a month or so after I was hired, then I was sent to Glencoe, Georgia, to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center for an 8-week criminal investigator training. And that is a kind of a basic training that special agents from all the different agencies go to. Typically, the FBI and the DEA train at the Quantico training facility in Quantico, Virginia, whereas most of the other agencies, you know, EPA and Secret Service and Border Patrol and ICE, and they all train at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia. So that's where I was sent in late 1993, early 1994 for an 8-week training session. And there was also, well, interestingly enough, I was chosen or voted to be president of that training class. And it was kind of funny the way that happened, because I was sitting in this arena, kind of a amphitheater classroom, and I'm down at the bottom because my name is Bannister, so I'm at the beginning of the alphabet. And they asked for someone to volunteer to collect picture money, you know, money for the class picture. And I look around when they ask for a volunteer and no one's raising their hand. And I'm thinking, well, how hard could it be to collect picture money? I mean, I'll volunteer. So I raised my hand and volunteered. And then the next question was, okay, well, now we have to elect a class president. And so out of 40-something people, the only person that raised their hand and got noticed by everybody was me, because I volunteered to collect the picture money. So they ended up electing me class president. And so I was class president for the 8-week session. And then when I came back for a second 8-week session, we all had to come back for more specialized criminal investigator training. And at that point, I was reelected class president for another 8-week session. So took lots of video and pictures. I was also kind of the class historian. I was able to bypass any of the tax classes because I was already a certified public accountant, and with the tax training I already had, I basically wasn't required to take the IRS training because, as far as they could tell, I already knew the material. So there was about 16 weeks of that total training near the beginning of my career in 1993, 1994. And then it was, I think, like March of 1994, I was fully trained, you know, with the firearm, with all the criminal investigator training. And I was sent back to the San Francisco office to begin, you know, a full, expected a 20-year career with the IRS. Eventually, I was actually transferred from San Francisco back down to San Jose, which is where I, you know, was born and raised, where I grew up. And so, you know, mid-1994, I thought it was pretty cool that, you know, I'd become a federal agent, federal criminal investigator in my hometown. And the IRS didn't typically move agents around like the FBI, the Secret Service would. So I had this pretty cool, you know, law enforcement job right there in my hometown. So when we would do surveillances and investigations, you know, I pretty much knew all my surroundings, all the way from San Jose up to San Francisco and everywhere in between.
And you had a very interesting experience, Joe, on your first day at the job, which relates to the you opening up the Internal Revenue Code, the law, the Bible of the IRS, which is a very interesting aspect of your experience early on. Maybe perhaps you can share that with the audience.
Sure. So first day on the job, you know, as I said, I came from the outside. I wasn't a government worker prior to then. And so, you know, I had the attitude and the ethics that, well, if I'm getting paid to do work, I should be actually working. But as I mentioned, without any training and had barely taken the oath to support and defend the Constitution over in Oakland, I couldn't really do much, but I didn't want to do nothing, you know, twiddle my thumbs because I was getting paid. So I looked up on the shelf of my cubicle and I saw that there was a volume of the Internal Revenue Code. And I forget if there were 2 or 3, you know, big thick books at the time. Yeah, you're holding it up. I think there was actually 2 or 3 volumes of the same code. You've got it all in one bound volume, but yeah. That gives the viewers the idea. And so I thought, okay, well, I know that there's certain sections of the Internal Revenue Code that deal with criminal violations of the income tax laws. So how about if I crack open the Internal Revenue Code and begin to review those sections that I would be investigating and enforcing? So I cracked open the books and I was, looking through and, basically like I was sitting at a library. And again, I had nothing else I could do because I wasn't allowed really to do anything else. And so my boss at the time, who was a former Marine, big, lot thicker mustache than I have, real gruff guy, and he comes over and he says, "Bannister, what are you doing?" And I just looked up at him sheepishly and said, "Well, I'm just looking at the Internal Revenue Code, some of the statutes that I'm going to be enforcing and investigating." And he said, "Close that book. You're not a CPA anymore. You're an IRS special agent." And I just thought, as I mentioned about culture shock, I just thought it was really odd. I didn't really think there's anything like conspiratorial about it, but it just kind of shows the myopic, just closed-mindedness of somehow, I was doing something wrong by looking at inside the Internal Revenue Code.
I mean, your job will be to enforce the criminal federal tax laws here in the Internal Revenue Code book, and his boss is saying, don't worry about the law. Don't even try to understand any aspect of this volume of books of laws that you are going to be paid working full-time to enforce. Don't even crack it open, close it up. We'll just tell you what you do, whether it's lawful or not. Well, you have to just trust us, basically. That's kind of an attitude they have, which is kind of interesting, because people don't realize that these guys, Joe, at the IRS, are ignorant of the law. They're not taught the law. They're just taught to do this, do that, the other, whatever your boss tells you. The law, let us at the very higher levels worry about that. So that's kind of interesting, Joe. Now tell us how you got into the whole tax truth movement. How was that you heard about the income tax system being a complete utter fraud on the American people, and that got you to look into this direction that you eventually ended up leaving the IRS?
Well, as I kind of mentioned, back when I was first sworn in, when I started the work at the IRS, was November of 1993. And so for about 3 years, till around December of 1996, I had, really the time of my life in terms of professional satisfaction. I had earned a certified public accountant certificate, so I was a CPA, and I was a, gun-carrying, badge-wearing IRS criminal investigator working in my hometown, making pretty good money, although I had to take a huge pay cut from the private sector when I went into the government. But, eventually after those 3 years, I was able to work my way up the pay scale. And so I thought those first 3 years would be the first 3 years of a 20-year career with the IRS. And, a law enforcement career in the federal government can be as little as 20 years, and then you're out. So I started when I was about 30, and I would have been able to retire, about 12, 13 years ago when I was 50, with a really nice retirement and lifetime benefits. And that was the expectation after the first 3 years there. But in about December of 1996, about 3 years into my career, I was listening to a talk radio show in the San Francisco Bay Area, as I typically did if I was out in my government car doing investigations, listening to the AM radio talk show. The call letters are KSFO, and the radio station is still around, 560 on the dial. And so there was a host on KSFO. His name was Jeff Metcalf. I spelled his first name a little bit different, Geoff, Jeff Metcalf. And Jeff Metcalf had a guest on his show named Devvy Kidd, and her name's also unusual, Devvy, last name Kidd, Kidd. And so Devvy Kidd is on Jeff Metcalf's show, and she's talking about, among other things, the federal income tax, and claiming that the federal income tax is voluntary. In other words, there was no mandate in the law, no requirement in the law to file tax returns and pay, I should say file income tax returns and pay federal income tax. And so I literally, when I heard her say this on the show, I was in my government car with my, Sig Sauer 9mm handgun on my hip and my handcuffs, and I was out doing investigations, and I heard her make these claims, and I thought, wow, I always thought this Jeff Metcalf guy was pretty honorable, and his guests had all kinds of truthful information, and I was very impressed by how honest he was and how his guests always had details and information that were provable. They had evidence to back it up. But when he had Devvy Kidd claiming that the income tax was voluntary, there was no mandate to pay it or to file federal income tax returns, I thought, wow, how could I have misjudged this talk show host to be allowing this woman to make these outrageous claims and make them on a radio station where, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people are going to hear these outrageous claims. So that was in December of 1996, about 3 years into my career with the IRS. And so I decided I have got to get to the bottom of this, okay? Either I am not the great good investigator that I thought I was, where I can tell if I think that somebody is truthful and honorable, like a Jeff Metcalf, and yet the guy's a total clown, he's having clownish people on his show making these outrageous claims, well, that's not good for me because I'm not a very good judge of people's body language and their character. But by the same token, if there's something to this, and yet my job is to, actually investigate people, arrest them, give the investigative information to a prosecutor, to put them in prison, to convict them and put them in prison, then I probably should get to the bottom of this for that reason also. And so that's was my motivation initially to get in touch with Devvy Kidd, and we are talking about the late 90s, basically early 90s, early to mid 90s. And so I sent away, she said on the radio show that if you sent $2, $1 or $2 in an envelope to an address in Colorado, that she would send her information, her brochures, her booklets. And so I sent away my $2 in December of 1996, and in early to mid-January of 1997, I received these 2 booklets in the mail. One was called Why a Bankrupt America, and then the other was called Blind Loyalty. And in these booklets, Devvy basically outlined all kinds of stuff that today in 2026 are kind of very familiar to the public because we have had the benefit of the internet since the early 90s. But you have to remember that back in the early to mid 90s, internet was barely up and running or available to most people. And so I'm, basically still reading her booklets and getting them in the snail mail. Mm-hmm. But in there, she gave more details about many issues, but concentrating on the income tax, that was where my focus was. And she mentioned various people who had more information about the income tax. She would provide excerpts from their court cases or their claims that they made, and then provide addresses and phone numbers for some of these people. And so one person in particular, his name was Bill Conklin, and I think by this point Bill's passed away. But anyway, I called up Bill because the phone number was in his press release, and I told him, I'm not, I'm an IRS special agent, but I'm not calling you to do a sting on you or, lie to you. I'm truly just trying to find out what's going on here with the income tax. And your name was in Devvy Kidd's booklet, and so I'm trying to find out more information. And so he suggested that I contact a guy named Paymon. And we're talking about, January, February of 1997, and I did not like Paymon. Okay, is this going to be like the king of the tax protesters? What am I getting myself into? Mm-hmm. But, I started the ball rolling calling Bill Conklin, so he said to call Paymon, so I called Paymon. Mm-hmm. So Paymon was the second person, after Bill, mm-hmm. that I got in touch with. And Paymon began to, I guess first off, and, maybe Paymon can describe how he was taking it on his end, but from my end, I was just trying to be sincere. That was interesting.
Let me tell you about that, Joe, because when you first called me, I was called by Bill and said, look, this guy's a special agent of the IRS, but I think he's sincere. He's not looking to investigate us criminally. He really wants to know the truth. And I told him, great, if he is, we'll educate him, tell him the truth, no problem. And then when you called, I could tell you were sincere, and you said you want to know the truth about our claims. So yes, that's when I started educating you and putting you in touch with other people, the movement. I gave you our first course called A Practical Road to Freedom from Oppressive Taxation Control. I used to teach that class. 9-week class, once a week for 9 weeks for 3 hours. I recorded that audio tape. I gave you one of those. I labeled it for you Midnight Basketball. So in case one of your colleagues or your boss sees that in your car, what is this stuff you got here, this Practical Road to Freedom course? Is this some kind of a tax protest material? Why are you looking at this, So in order to protect you from that potential confrontation with your boss, as I just put that label on there and let you study. And you met Sean and Steve of Free Enterprise Society and others from the freedom movement. And but you took a little while to do your investigation, Joe. I remember you were pretty thorough. You took over a while to read at nighttime to investigate things. Is that what you did at nighttime or weekends? You would research on your own everything that you came across?
Yeah, the IRS special agents, I presume it's still the case. We would work 50-hour work weeks, so you basically get paid an extra quarter of your salary as overtime. And so rather than a 40-hour week, you'd work 40 plus 10 hours or 50-hour work weeks. So I had a 50-hour work week. The time I was, by the time I was communicating with you, I was in San Jose. I had made that transfer from San Francisco down to San Jose. But with the commute back and forth and a 10-hour work day, and then soccer coach to my young sons and husband and paying all the bills, finding the time was difficult, but I knew I wanted to get to the bottom of it too. So yeah, it took me a couple of years, all throughout 1997, all throughout 1998. And of course, you and I kept in communication, and you put me in touch with other people, other attorneys, CPAs, all kinds of people that I could talk with, and about other topics besides the income tax. But for our purposes, we can concentrate on that. There's enough interesting information there. Mm. But yeah, it took me a couple of years to kind of get through it and really make sure as best I could. And there came to a point, after that 2 years when I realized, I think I've gathered about all the information that I can gather to prove that there's something rotten here and that I need to confront my supervisors at the IRS I guess when I say confront, I more mean approach them. I didn't, want to punch anybody in the nose or get mad at anyone, but I definitely, if I had any bias at all as I started and during that 2-year period, is that this couldn't possibly be true, right? Because my entire professional life revolved around the income tax. Accounting degree where you take tax classes at the university and then the CPA exam. One of the parts to the CPA exam is on taxation, largely income taxation. Then I go in and become an IRS special agent, and there's more training there. And so, I was not believing it could possibly be true. But as a criminal investigator, what's your job is to gather evidence, and not just any evidence, but evidence that could actually be put into court because it's factual, because it's provable, because it's corroborated by other evidence. And so during that 2-year period, I just kept gathering more and more evidence in the form of, statutes, regulations, court cases, history of the income tax and the laws that were passed. And, what I found interesting, of course, is as a financial investigator, the thing that we sniff out is the paper trail, right? It's the paper trail that's always going to get the bad guy. And so the thing is, though, the IRS and the income tax has quite the paper trail also. And so I simply followed that same paper trail, and surprisingly, I guess you could say, came to a conclusion that there's really something deceitful, and illegal, apparently illegal, about this income tax system. And so I need to approach my bosses at the IRS and let them know that, I've been looking into this and I've come to some very concerning, preliminary conclusions. And so that's what I did. I was still working at the IRS during that 2-year period of investigating the income tax. I still go to work every day to earn my pay, do criminal investigations. One particular anecdotal story, which I think is interesting to share, is that I was asked to participate in a search warrant down in the Fresno area. And it was this big, huge, horse property. So they had to have 20 or 30 IRS special agents to conduct this search warrant. And at the time, I was the asset forfeiture coordinator. So in addition to whatever, more law enforcement, gun out kind of that I did initially, my main job was to inventory anything that was seized during the search warrant. And so I was also one of the searchers, one of the people that actually gather evidence in this huge property. And so the guy we were investigating actually had this very big walk-in closet, and inside the closet were bookshelves. And a number of the books on the bookshelves I had in my own bookshelves that I had accumulated over this 2-year period. And so that was a real kind of a red pill moment when I thought, okay, here we are investigating this guy who hadn't filed or paid, and some kind of income tax charges that we may bring against him at some point. And yet he's got these same books that I've either acquired or been given on loan to investigate, the truth about the income tax. And so that was, just a surreal moment to be standing in this walk-in closet, looking at books that this gentleman had, that I had also in my own bookshelf. And anyway, it was bizarre.
So you ended up writing a book, though, about the income tax research that you did. Tell us about the book. I know we ended up publishing it for you and distributing the book for you. But tell us what led you to want to write a book, and then how did you, give it to the IRS to refute?
Well, during the during the 2-year period, it's probably, you don't even have to be a criminal investigator to understand if you're, some store is overcharging you, or the mechanic shop is giving you some repairs that you didn't need, and you have to gather evidence to prove out your case. That's what I did during this 2-year period, is I would gather all these details, all this information that I never learned on the CPA exam, never learned at San Jose State, never learned in IRS training, but nevertheless was truthful because it came out of, the U.S. Supreme Court or the Internal Revenue Code or the Code of Federal Regulations. And so in gathering all of this information, I decided that it might be, beneficial, worthwhile to gather up the highlights, some of the information. If I had gathered up all the information, the report probably would have been hundreds and hundreds of pages long. But I basically gathered up some of the highlights of the evidence that I had encountered, and I put it into a report that was around 95 pages long. And so that report is what I provided. There you go. There's an old copy of it. That report is what I actually submitted to my IRS supervisors at the San Jose, California IRS headquarters. And of course, I spoke with Paymon ahead of issuing the report because I kind of saw the writing on the wall that once I let my bosses know that I'm really concerned about these things, I'm not sure, how much longer I'll be able to last at the IRS. I really wasn't sure whether they'd tried to destroy what was otherwise a very excellent reputation, for being a hard worker, for being diligent, for being, honorable, having integrity. And so I really didn't know what would happen, but Paymon was certainly instrumental in helping me, how do I make sure that the public will know about me or will get to see, some of the evidence that I've encountered. And so basically, as Paymon mentioned earlier, he basically helped me to have, 10,000 copies of that report that I had issued to my supervisors ready in the event that I wouldn't be lasting very much longer at the IRS. So it was about, what's interesting is it's February 10th, and it was February 8th of 1999 when I remember, I think that was around the date that I handed in the report. And I think it was around the February 10th or so.
February 8th, you wrote a letter to the IRS commissioner.
Yeah.
That's the letter, yep. Have it right here, folks. Keep going, Joe, huh?
So February is always a month that brings back lots of memories. So as I recall, February 8th, so that was when I gave them the details and basically said, hey, in that letter that you're showing the audience, hey, I've kind of gone to bat for the agency and the income tax. I've done everything I can to disprove this evidence, but there's a lot of things that give me concern. And by the way, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. The Treasury Secretary and the IRS Commissioner tell us that we must report waste, fraud, and abuse. Certainly the ethics of the CPA profession. Everything told me that I needed to speak up. And so I did. And it took, I think, maybe nearly a week or so.
February 17th, just 9 days later. This is the letter they sent you, Joe. This is everybody. Yeah, we're going to put this on the recorded thing. Go ahead, Joe. Tell them about your humble response. Several pages, humble response, detailed, clear. You guys, you can read it at agentfortruth.com. All these documents are there, and we put them also link in this description. But yeah, after all that 3.5 pages of introduction, that's all they gave you, Joe. What did it say?
Yeah. Well, in my February 8th letter, I said, of course, I wanted them to respond and to help me through what was going on here. I was finding things that were very concerning, and so I thought, well, maybe I've made an error somewhere, and they can set me straight. But I did say, if you can't help me, I'll have to resign because I can't serve two masters. I can't, serve God and have integrity, and yet also not have these questions and concerns addressed. And so in the letter that you just showed, on the 17th, the response was very short, and it was, we'll be happy to provide you with the paperwork to tender your resignation, without any answers. And so once they gave me that letter, and this is up in the, what's today called the special agent in charge of the San Jose Central California district, they took I was to go downstairs and turn in my firearm and my badge and my credentials, and basically all I was left with was a pager. And I was sent home for a week of administrative leave. And they basically said, call us in a week, keep your pager close by in case we call you. And they sent me home for a week to think about what my next move would be. So they didn't fire me, but they, put a time frame of a week of administrative leave. And so as you saw by the letter, that began on February 17th. So then February 25th, so anyway, I did go home on February 17th and, dealing with a very perplexed spouse, my wife, who, I had taken a pay cut back when I started with the IRS, put her through hell by having to go to Glencoe, Georgia for, 16 weeks of training, the travel that was involved in being a criminal investigator. And then she was aware that during this 2-year period through 1997 and 1998 that I was investigating these things. And she was concerned about that. But when I actually came, home on February 17th and said, I doubt I'm going to have this job much longer, it was very painful for her, for the family, for myself. And so during that week, I basically thought, long and hard about what should I do. There aren't any self-help books, about how to quit a position as an IRS special agent. But I decided, and I was getting, opinions from all kinds of people, including yourself. And I just thought, I really have earned a good reputation for honesty and hard work. And what I don't want is to stick around the IRS and let them dirty me up with some fake, accusations. And of course, in hindsight, I think I made the right decision. I mean, I'm sure your audience is well aware of the way, the media and the government have to dirty people up, who don't deserve to be dirtied up. So I did decide that I was going to resign. And so February 25th of 1999, during that week, I basically composed a resignation letter. And I, looking at the calendar, I'm like, wow, okay, so the 25th of February is my birthday. And it's also the day in 1913 when Philander Knox claimed that the 16th Amendment had been ratified. So I thought, wow, the timing of this is pretty crazy. I think I'm going to resign on my birthday, which is really, in a sense, the birthday for the income tax, and the day that I'm going to always remember that I resigned from the IRS. So my resignation letter is dated February 25th, 1999. And what's that going to be? Is that going to be 27 years coming up here?
In just
February,
a few days, Joe, will be 27 years that you resigned from the IRS. And your letter, again, several pages long, folks, is a very respectful, thorough letter, thoughtful letter that Joe wrote to IRS Commissioner Charles Rosati about why he resigned. And then Joe was scheduled to speak at our March 13th, 1999 Freedom Rally of Freedom Law School, where I would have about a dozen or so speakers over 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, speak about various issues related to our freedom, our rights, government corruption. And Joe was scheduled to speak there without his picture, because at the time we went to print to put out the brochures. 2 months ahead in January, Joe was still working for the IRS. He still had not turned the book to his superiors to confront them about, hey, you need to address these legitimate concerns. So his picture wasn't on the brochure at all. And so the first time when we put Joe on our Freedom Rally in March 1999, that was the first time anybody else except myself and maybe a few other people had seen Joe in the movement in person. He came out. We had over 300 people, Joe, that turned out at the event, and at the very end, when you were the last speaker of the whole weekend, it was packed, full. No one was walking around. No one was outside the doors, chit-chatting in the hallway. They all want to know who's this IRS, a special agent who defected from the IRS, from the dark side of Darth Vader to the truth and freedom. Okay, and so it was really a special event. And I remember, like you said, we had 10,000 copies of your book printed, and I think we distributed about 1,000 in one night. Some people got boxes of your books to put out, to get out to people, because this was such a big deal. And notably, everybody, I had notified all the media in Southern California, Los Angeles greater area. I faxed them about Joe coming out, whistleblower, exposing IRS fraud. And you know how many media reporters showed up, folks? You guessed it, 0 showed up to hear about it. So this is, back then, again, Internet was very, very new still at that time. So Joe, you left the IRS, and I think we have to kind of end this right now, this part 1 of our interview. In part 2, as I told you guys, we're into how Joe, now that he left the IRS, he went out to try to educate and expose the fraud of the IRS, the massive multi-trillion-dollar fraud of the American people. And with that, went through that process. And then part 3, we will cover how the IRS tried to silence Joel, try to put him in prison for taxes, and that failed. It boomeranged in the face of the IRS. So Joe has a really incredible story, folks. It's absolutely unique. You don't want to miss part 2 and part 3 of that. So Joe, I'd like to thank you very much, my friend, being with us again. And I think we're going to let Joe, I'm going to have to let Joe for the question answer session, right? So Joe, we have to let you go, my friend. We have to take some questions from people. But thank you for being with us. I appreciate you, brother. We'll be in touch for the next interview in a few weeks.
Thank you, Payman. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, my friend.
Take care.
Take care. Good night, Joe. So without any more hesitation, let me bring you Joe Banister. Joe, thanks for being with me again.
Thanks, Payman. Thanks for having me. It's actually agentfortruth.com, but you probably just misspoke there.
Yes, I did. Thanks for correcting me, Joe. So we, like I said, we talked last time when he resigned from the IRS because they did not respond to your request. IRS to review your book to show, if you're wrong about this, if the income tax system is a scam, legally on the fraud of American people, you conclude that the income tax cannot be mandatory for American people the way it's written, and they would not respond to you. They said just leave, and if otherwise, whatever, they don't care about you or your opinion or your research, and so you ended up leaving. So after you spoke at our Freedom Rally, that was in March 1999, you came across Bob Schultz of We the People Foundation for Constitutional Education. Tell us about how you met him, then go from there to how you ended up, going to the debates he set up with the government, please.
Well, I think actually Bob discovered me. So what happened was, I left the IRS on my birthday in 1999, February 25th, same date in 1913 when the government claimed that they ratified the 16th Amendment. So a date I'll certainly never forget. But after I left, I didn't have any work, right? Because I had had that job for almost 5.5 years. Nice, secure government pay. And so I was working at various contract accounting jobs. And, ever since when I first resigned, immediately I was getting calls and emails. We are talking about 1999, so a lot of the social media didn't exist. And maybe was Facebook even around? I don't know. But anyway, archaic times back in 1999. And so it was probably an email or might have been a phone call from someone who knew someone that Bob Schultz had come across my story. And Bob, who was from, upstate New York, and he had a talk radio show in New York. I presume it was like, Manhattan, or we broadcasted through, throughout downtown New York and upstate New York. And he was all about keeping the government in check, making sure that they were obeying federal and state constitutions, which is certainly a great pursuit. And one or more listeners informed him that this IRS special agent had recently resigned and was talking about the income tax and all of the scam of the income tax and the manner in which it's enforced versus what the law, actually says on the books that Congress passed and the president has signed. And so Bob invited me on his show. And, well, Payman, you probably know more than anyone since you met me even before I resigned, that I'm not exactly a media savvy guy, to say the least. And so anyway, I'm getting these calls from people, and they want me to be on their radio show or their podcast. They didn't have podcasts then, by telephone, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. And I'm just kind of accepting invitations, right? I don't really know who these people are, what they're about. I just figure if I'm invited and they're interested in what happened to me, I'll come on. So I first came on Bob's radio show. Don't know how long, he had the show or whatever, but apparently my voice was broadcasted over the greater New York boroughs and into upstate New York one day, and it was probably like March or April, probably prior to April 15th for sure. And, so that's really how I met Bob, was just on the radio, and came to find out that he was very well known in New York for holding the government accountable. And he basically had an idea. Well, his show would ask the listeners, what should we do next? We found out this information. What should we do about it? Which again is a great posture to have. And so the idea that was cooked up was that there would be a symposium in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club, which some may know is like literally right across the street from the Treasury building, and literally right from the White House. It's literally like a block away, as I recall. And so Bob, having media connections and all the experience that he had, I don't know if he was maybe in his 60s at the time. Now he's in his 80s. Anyway, so he set up this whole symposium, and like I said before, I'm just kind of going where I'm invited, and so Bob decided to have this symposium, and he invited not only myself, but some of the people that I referred to in my report that I had issued to the IRS. And you may even remember because of various advertisements and your involvement so far back. What's it called? I forget what the symposium was even called. Do you recall?
The first one did not have a name, but what I do remember, Joe, was that it was Bill Conklin was there because he talked about the right to be silent. The Fifth Amendment protects our right to be silent, to give not any information to the government that they accuse against you. And we had Bill Benson was there talking about the 16th Amendment of the Constitution not being properly ratified. And you were the three of you were the main stars. Devvy Kidd spoke for a little bit also. But that was the big thing about it. But the way it got extra publicity was really the interesting thing about it. You ought to tell our listeners how it got more publicity than you guys planned on a symposium.
Well, yeah, maybe it was just called like Symposium on the Income Tax. But anyway, what happened was, and I don't know whether Bob had anything to do with this or this is just typical, but C-SPAN, which, again, we're talking 1999 versus today. C-SPAN a lot of times was how people would get news about what was going on in D.C. And as I understand it, especially people in Congress, the staffers, the congressmen, congresswomen, the senators, would have CNN going in their, C-SPAN going on in their offices and throughout the halls of the Capitol and the White House and everywhere. So in terms of a media organ that DC was dialed into, C-SPAN was definitely that. And so, however it came about, C-SPAN covered that July 1999 symposium. And so we learned, the group of us who spoke, and Bob as well. And Bob, once Bob had me on his radio show, we became, I want to say close. We were geographically far away. I've never been to his house. I don't think he's ever been to mine. But he definitely, we kept in close contact because we had a similar goal, to hold the federal government accountable regarding the income tax. And so I learned from him that the symposium being broadcast on C-SPAN was huge. I mean, like, it literally got everyone's attention in D.C. or,
If I may interrupt you for a second, Joe, here's how I remember what happened then. What happened was that C-SPAN was supposed to cover something at this place, but those guys got canceled. And right next door to them, at the National Press Club, the symposium that Bob Schultz set up with you and others was scheduled. So C-SPAN staff figured that, well, this event we're going to cover got canceled, but there's another one right here. We can cover this one while we're at it on income taxing. Oh, that's an interesting topic. What the heck? We're already here. And when they did that, that was seen widely, not just by D.C., but this was C-SPAN was a lot of people across America used to see it because it was cable news shows back at the time. You still have broadcast with antennas in America. Cable news was big, so you'd have no internet. I mean, YouTube was very, very new at the time, so this got, in fact, and they sold, I remember, the video of it, 3.5 hours, they sold it for I think like $50-$60 of back then money. And that was the most sold recording of C-SPAN that they ever had. Anything that broadcast in America, people could buy the video of it to play at their home. But this was the most requested one they ever had in history. So yes, that was a huge thing. It was a luck. It was that the C-SPAN covered the symposium by accident, basically, yeah. But this was not the first time, though. By the way, that's available on our website and on Joe's website. It's available. We call it Illegality and Income Tax Exposed. It was done July 1999. But after that, though, tell us about the USA Today ads, how that ended up being on several times on USA Today. Please, Joe.
I'm sorry, about the ads?
Yeah, because there was more symposiums that was done by Bob, and correct me if I'm wrong, he invited the IRS, he invited the Department of Injustice, his leadership, DOJ, he invited heads of Congress, someone from the president's office was contacted and writing, hey, come and send somebody, come on, debate Joe Banister. And he also, by that time, from IRS agent Sherry Jackson and John Turner had stepped forward, contacted, because of you, Bob Schultz, and they said, hey, we're former IRS agents and we agree with Joe. The income tax is a giant fraud, right? So now, instead of just Joe alone, he became the three amigos, the three of you together, And so that symposiums, additional ones in D.C., and how many times government showed up to these symposiums, Joe? Exactly. Zero. They never, ever showed up. In fact, I remember one time, correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, you were there at around the IRS's building with Bob Schultz. You guys were demonstrating in there, and the commissioner of IRS was seeing you guys from up there, but wouldn't come down, agree to debate you guys, or send somebody else. Is that correct?
Yes, there's a picture of Sherry, John, and I with Bob, and we're standing outside of the Treasury building because they wouldn't let us in. Mm-hmm. And inside was a press conference that was being held by the IRS commissioner. Mm-hmm. And David K. Johnston, formerly of the New York Times, who I'm not really the greatest fan of, but he posed the question, a bit mismatched, but he posed a question, which you probably have on your website too, and it's in America, Freedom to Fascism, where, as I recall, David K. Johnston asked the commissioner, there's a group of people outside, he was referring to us, Bob, Sherry, Joe, and John, there's a group of people outside who claim that we're not required to pay taxes. So, of course, right away, I don't like, he doesn't specify about income taxes, because that's a huge difference between just saying taxes generically and income taxes. But anyway, still glad that he asked the question. And he asked it of, what was that commissioner's name? Iverson?
Iverson, right. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, and again, maybe you can splice in or put a link when you have this archive of this interview.
Yes.
It's it's like a once-in-a-lifetime question. Not quite the question I would have asked, but very good for a New York Times reporter. Mm-hmm. And also the commissioner's response. Mm-hmm. And of course, after being directly asked by a New York Times reporter, is there a law that requires us to pay taxes? Mm-hmm. And all that the commissioner can say is, well, I've been paying my taxes since I was, 12 years old and my paper route, and we need money for wars and welfare and, blah, blah, blah. But he couldn't point to a single law. And then maybe it was like a deputy commissioner, female lady, pushes him out of the way. Like, well, we don't want to have any more from the commissioner right now. So the leapfrogging, the building of effort, it just grew exponentially. Mm-hmm. And as I say, maybe Bob Schultz wouldn't have even known about me if you hadn't had me speak at your rally or didn't see a flyer or one of his listeners didn't. And literally, and this is a lesson that I always tell people who feel like they're not doing anything worthwhile for the good of the cause. Devvy Kidd wasn't getting paid for any of her radio shows, hundreds that she did, maybe thousands. But there was an IRS special agent who just happened to be listening that one day in 1996 when she was on KSFO in the San Francisco Bay Area. And so who knows how many other times she was on shows, spoke, nobody really cared, or, nobody of consequence, or people who could be of consequence didn't do anything about it. Whatever. You keep trying. You keep taking a bite at the apple. And so in a similar way, You and I worked closely together in 1997, 98 before I even resigned. Continued to, you introduced me to other people who were skeptical, if I was sincere. And we just kept building. And so, the interview or that question from Johnston to the commissioner probably wouldn't have happened without the We the People effort. But the We the People effort wouldn't have happened without the Bob Schultz interview of Joe Banister. And then that wouldn't have happened if, there wasn't a March Freedom Law School rally. So, I mean, we need to keep trying and keep being sincere, keep being good examples. And, ultimately it's going to be God's timetable, whether, when we get delivered from the income tax. But all we can do is do our best, tell the truth. And anyway, that's what was going on with Bob Schultz and the We the People Foundation. He interspersed with these symposiums. One, as you say, happened in July of 1999. I think another one was in November of 1999. And there were 3 or 4 USA Today ads. Bob, as he always did, he said, well, what do we do next? We have our July symposium and the government doesn't show up, even though they're invited. And we have our November symposium and the government's invited. We're literally right across the street. They can just walk across the street and have a talk with us. No government shows up. And believe me, Bob had invited them officially. So at one point, he's like, well, what else do we do? And so the idea came up that we create full-page, like centerfold ads in the USA Today. And again, for those people who were born, after 2000 or in the late 90s, a lot of us had to rely on newspapers for our news. And so, and the USA Today was delivered to millions of hotel rooms. That was the way that they would, filter their controlled news to millions of people traveling. And so the idea was hatched, well, why don't we put full-page ads in the USA Today so that when people open up their paper in the morning and they're sipping their coffee and they're like, what's this? The income tax is a scam? Where else would they ever hear that or see that in 1999 and 2000? So the ads were very effective. In fact, I think they were so effective that by the time Bob wanted to run an additional ad, the USA Today refused to accept his money and run the ad.
Yes, after the 4th ad, because they're each, I think 50,000 each, if I remember, or 25,000. I think 40,000 each. It was Mike Bodine's idea. He's Bob's assistant. So let's try that, see how that works. And Mike Bodine gave that was a lot of money back then. And to him, it was a lot of his own personal money, funded it, the first one. And so after the first one, they came out in 2000. Then there were 3 more done in early 2001. And then after that, then the USA Today told Bob Schultz, no more ads for you. We don't want your money. Obviously, they were contacted by the IRS and saying, you're giving these bad guys exposure, publicity. Let's cancel their way of reaching the American people. And I'm going to show people right here, guys. This is the very first one of the USA Today ads that came out in 99. And but what was most interesting, I remember, Joe, in this one, is that Bob put in here the part in green. You cannot read very well, but I'll read it for you. That citizens cannot voluntarily file a federal income tax return without surrendering their Fifth Amendment right to not to bear witness against themselves. But here's the most interesting part. Okay. On June 2nd, the White House reneged on their promises it made during the April 13th meeting. As with 3 previous conferences, the government has again refused to debate the grievances. And Jason Furman of the White House. He was the senior economic advisor of the National Economic Council. Okay, he told Bob Schultz the legality of the income tax is not a high priority item at the White House, and we will not participate in any commerce on the subject. End of quote. So I saw that in the answer. I thought, whoa, they're open about it. They don't care if they get your money but following the Constitution and laws. To the federal government, we the American people, you are simply a dumb, stupid sheep for them to shear. Make you afraid of them? Stand in line? We'll shear you of your wool. You need to stay warm? No. The government will take your money. We damn the laws of the Constitution. They don't care to discuss the legality of income tax. And obviously, this mafia does not want to participate in any conference on the subject. Well, why would they? Why would any criminal or mobster want to have a debate about their criminality and the acts of criminality they've done? They don't want to give exposure to it. They want to cover it up. So that's the thing that really got my attention, Joe. I remember about that. And I remember, Joe, that around this time, Joe, Bob told me one time he had 120,000 people on his email list. Back then, people, remember there was no social media. It was maybe MySpace was just getting started. There was no Facebook. So that was pretty big. 120,000 people were interested to opt in to get emails. And faxes more than that as well. And those got forwarded to other people, you know, those emails and faxes. So this was a movement really going big. And when U.S. Today said no more ads for you, then Bob Schultz put an ad in the New York Times. And he did that, or American Free Press. And then he also, Joe, if you remember, he had us all travel from across America with remonstrance, which is like a complaint to government, to follow the Constitution on income tax, and declaring war by Congress, not the president, stuff like that. And we all drove, myself and you, from California, many others drove to go serve our Congress members about the government must follow the U.S. Constitution and laws. And we served our congressmen in person as much as we could. I was lucky enough to be one of the, I think maybe just a few people who actually got to meet my congressman, okay? And his name was Lewis, in person. I think his wife liked me. She just let me in because I was the president of Freedom Law School. She thought I was a young law school president like Harvard. You know, she didn't know. It's a home-based law school. She let me in, talked to him, and I talked to him about this stuff, but typical rhino, political hack, you know, I could tell he had not interest in this stuff at all. And so we did all that stuff together back in those days. But maybe you could tell our audience a little bit more. The last symposium that we did with Larry B. Kraft and John Turner, a couple other people. Tell everybody about that symposium, please, Joe.
Sure. Well, that was the Truth in Taxation hearing.
Yes.
And what happened was, we could go on and on, couldn't we, about all the efforts that we made, significant efforts. But Bob Schultz decided that he was going to do a hunger fast and stop eating and patrol the halls of Congress until he could get someone to agree to hear our petitions, our grievances about the income tax. You know, here, look at our evidence showing that we're being lied to about the income tax. And so finally, Roscoe Bartlett, who was a congressman from Maryland, noticed that Bob had a Constitution in his pocket, which Bob always carried. And it turns out that Roscoe Bartlett also always carried a Constitution in his pocket. And so they began chatting, and Bob was able to secure Roscoe Bartlett's cooperation in scheduling a hearing, like an actual official congressional hearing. And so, of course, in the past, as we discussed earlier in your show, government never showed up. But maybe if we can get a congressman involved, we can get them to show up. So they actually had a meeting. Bob Schultz, Roscoe Bartlett, the House Rep, and Dan Bryant, who was in the DOJ, high up in the DOJ at the time. And apparently there might have been an IRS official too, I don't recall, but they actually signed a letter on Roscoe Bartlett's letterhead, the DOJ, that they would supply DOJ officials to attend this congressional hearing on the income tax. And as I was told, the IRS agreed to supply people, but the IRS wouldn't put it in writing, if you can believe the irony. So that was it was like, I think, in the summer of 2001.
Yes, correct.
And the hearing was supposed to occur like in September or October, and September 11th happened. The Twin Towers attacks, the Pentagon, and all of a sudden they had a great excuse to say, "Oh, we can't have the hearing anymore," because the country's basically everybody has to batten down the hatches. We're in a war. We can't be dealing with these domestic issues, and they decided that we're not bringing our people. The DOJ backed out. IRS backed out, and Roscoe Bartlett backed out. And so for all those efforts to get a hearing, Congress, our congressperson, Roscoe Bartlett, refused to continue to help us. Mm-hmm. So Bob, to his credit, said, well, that's not going to stop us. We may not be able to hold the hearing officially within the halls of Congress, but we're going to have one anyway.
Before we go on to that, Joe, let me just add a little bit, if I may, that Bob decided to have a hunger fast to death. I mean, literally. And he had I think 40 days plus of hunger fast before Congressman Bartlett said, hey, listen, I'll help out with this thing. But September 11, 9/11 was the excuse for the government to say, we don't want to do this thing now. We got to deal with terrorists out there. All this other stuff inside, which put him off later on, which many people feel today. The Epstein file, scandal, which was, has been showing up and getting worse and worse and worse. Many people feel that's what's going on with the war against Iran. Okay, now Epstein file, openness takes a back seat to, we have a war going on with this terrorist nation. The government says we have to go bomb them to pieces. So this was the same kind of a thing, looks like they did, Joe, here in this situation. So they got out of it that way. But tell us about the symposium you were after that,
So we did end up scheduling it anyway, and all of the witnesses, we were all preparing for a congressional hearing, so designating witnesses and gathering evidence. So we were already doing that anyway. And so Bob had to, reserve a hotel, I forget, somewhere in D.C. or Virginia, right in the belly of the beast, and reserve a whole conference room and, a huge symposium, not only for the participants, but all of the audience to see live. And so, it was really impressive when you consider, 25 years ago, the kind of technology that was available. But as far as I recall, it was live streamed. Of course, there was a recording made of the entire proceeding. And one by one, witnesses were brought forward with evidence. And so people like myself, former IRS Revenue Officer John Turner, former IRS Revenue Agent Sherry Jackson. I don't know if you recall Paul Chappell. Mm-hmm. He was a Treasury lawyer back in the 50s when they revised the 39 Internal Revenue Code to become the 1954 Internal Revenue Code. And Paul Chappell got in touch with me, one of dozens of attorneys, by the way, over the years that not only had learned the truth, but were willing to speak about it. But Paul, I thought, was one of the most extraordinary attorneys because he literally worked for the Treasury Department. He was part of the process of upgrading the 1939 Internal Revenue Code to the 1954 code. And yet he was calling me saying, bravo, the income tax is a scam. It's the vast majority of Americans aren't required to pay it. So I was just gobsmacked, and I think he was in his 80s back in the early 2000s, right? I mean, he's very elderly. He actually was blind by that point. He had lost his eyesight, but he was still practicing law, even with his minimal to non-existent sight. And Paul Chappell was also one of the people that testified. So, again, maybe you're really good at gathering footage. Maybe you've got some or all of that footage. I know Bob Schultz does. I've rewatched some of it, even in the last few months. And it's just fascinating how much evidence was put together and discussed and testified to. And then, but the one party that never showed up, despite multiple attempts and going into their backyard, right, to get them to come to the table was the government.
Yep.
They just absolutely refused over and over and over again, despite official invitations, despite us bending over backwards to accommodate them. And it's more than suspicious, obviously. They don't want to debate because the debate will show that they've been lying to the American people for over 100 years.
So, Joe, I think we're about to wrap up this part 2 because the part 3, the last part, is going to be the most interesting part you don't want to miss. And that is when the IRS and the Department of Injustice were sick and tired of Joe Banister going out there exposing a fraud to the American people. So they decided, you know what, we got to put this guy out. So they decided to try to put Joe in prison, okay, for which I'll tell you they failed. But how they failed is going to be the next part 3 of this interview we'll have. We'll have it sometime in early April, okay, with Joe Banister. So if you have not seen part 1, go see it. The link is below. The video is mentioned you heard here. We're going to put the links to them and the ones that we have in this description below. They're going to also be put on Joe Banister's website pretty soon. We're going to put it on there as well. So, Joe, you want to give me your website one more time, please, for people to check out?
Sure, thank you. Agent for Truth, that's FOR, agentfortruth.com.
Yep. So, there it is, people. The government has not been working for you for a long time. You've been working for them. Okay? It's the other way around. That's how the Founding Fathers didn't want it to be the way it is today. So, Joe, do you have any last comments you want to say to our audience before we close this interview until the next one?
Just kind of mentioned it before, but just be a good example to everyone, so let's all stay calm. Let's make sure that when we discuss this issue, people go, wow, that guy makes a lot of sense, or that gal makes a lot of sense. We'll just have to be patient, but keep working at it. We've made tremendous progress over the last, decades and decades, long before you and I came on board, right? But we just keep chipping away at it, and we will eventually, establish honorable or honest taxation, at least constitutional taxation. That'd be a good start. So thanks to everyone, and God bless everyone.
Thank you for being with us, Joe. I appreciate you.
Thank you.